All right, great. I want to see everyone, and here it is. View gallery. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. We are starting our meeting of the ad hoc committee on LADBS policies, and today is December 7th, 4 p.m. For people who don't know me, I am Stella Gray, and I'm a chair of this committee. And I hope that everyone had the agenda, and our speaker today, and the sole reason for us to gather today is to meet with Bryan Ramirez, who represents the Urban Forestry Division, and he kindly agreed to answer our questions. I also want to make a comment. The reason why we contacted Bryan is very practical. Very recently, we encountered a problem with one of the projects in our neighborhood. The address is 8875 Thrasher, the virgin lot that houses documented wildlife and black walnut grows. And there was a suspicion that someone is trying to cut the walnuts and clear the lot for future construction that is in plan check currently. And so the whole neighborhood was on alert. And when I contacted Bryan, he immediately took action and sent his people to verify what's going on. And so it wasn't a disaster, but if it were, it would have been averted thanks to him. And there was another incident where he was, and his staff was extremely helpful and instrumental in helping us to deal with it. So thank you very much, Bryan. And this is how we met via email. And now we have him virtually but live, and we're going to ask a lot of questions. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Stella. To everybody listening in, again, my name is Bryan Ramirez. I am with StreetsLA-Urban Forestry Division. I'm currently in the position of street tree superintendent. I oversee many of the great majority or almost all of the tree permits that are submitted to our division. A lot of the clearances and any impact to trees associated with development is usually reviewed by my team and ultimately by myself and one of my colleagues and division manager also, Hector Bañuelos and David Miranda. So we work alongside them. And I'm excited to be here. Again, my presence here is at the request of Ms. Stella Gray. And by all means, I'm willing to kind of convey some of the issues surrounding LADBS specifically is what this is allotted for. We have a lot of, I think, room for improvement as it pertains to tree preservation, but this particular portion is designated again to try to answer to the best of my ability the questions that anybody.
Okay, thank you, Bryan. Thank you very much. So I want to give a very brief background of what we actually encountered, and then we'll go through our questions. A lot of you, the committee members and Bryan had the questions prior to the meeting, so we will read the questions. But to give you a background, again, my specific interest, the committee's specific interest is interaction between various city agencies and LADBS. And very often, the more we dig, the more gaps we find. And in this case, I think there is also a gap. And so the UFD, Urban Forestry Division, as Bryan mentioned, is responsible for implementing the city's protected tree ordinance. And one of the LADBS role in this process is to make sure that the applicant for permits clears protected tree clearances that are mandated by the internal LADBS document. And it's actually, there is a document called Building Permit Clearance Handbook that is used to train plan checkers, and they supposedly follow the instruction in the book. The book doesn't really tell the plan checkers how to figure out what kind of clearance to request. And so there are several clearances: disturb, remove protected trees in private property, new alter driveways and curb, new alter sidewalks, and new alter parkway. So it is up to the plan checker to figure out which particular clearance is necessary for a specific project. And as we learned, not all the plan checkers are properly trained and assign the right permits. And in case of 8875 Thrasher, the clearance that was requested was a new alter sidewalk, which has nothing to do with this Virgin Hill, Virgin property. And it turned out, thanks to Bryan, we clarified that they really need to clear the disturb, remove protected trees on private property. And another nuance of the whole process is that, as always, it is up to the applicant to declare whether he has or he doesn't have a protected tree, he or she protected species on the property. So it is up to the applicant's integrity to declare it, and the plan checker has no way to verify it. So with that, I want to I see one hand raised. I think that we will leave questions maybe closer to the end, or at least if they are specific to our main questions, we can elaborate. So I'll try to watch, and Travis, you too, right? If someone, thank you. All right. So let's go to question number one, which is just a basic request, Bryan, if we can imagine that we're applicants, or you're an applicant, and you come for plan check, and what happens? What steps do the plan checker have to take, and what is the responsibility of the applicant? Could you please?
Yes, Stella, I can attempt to elaborate on that to the best of my ability. Again, we are not Department of Building and Safety. That is an entirely separate department than the Department of Public Works, which is where my the urban forestry is housed. Essentially, we are Department of Public Works, Bureau of Street Services, and the Urban Forestry Division. And the Department of Building and Safety is still within the city's umbrella, but it is an entirely separate department, which is at times where a bit of the disconnect can originate from. Stella, I did have a brief presentation to kind of give a kind of a case study to kind of elaborate on some of the issues, if allowed to. I'd love to dive into it and kind of convey that over to you, and then begin answering the questions if that's acceptable by you.
Sure, of course.
If I would
share a screen.
Yes.
Well, we have a boss here too. I can help.
You should be able to share your screen now.
Great. And again, I had a brief slideshow that I want to just kind of get a case study so everybody is on the same page with some of these clearances and Department of Building and Safety and some of the gaps that tend to occur, which we're having ongoing discussions. And again, these meetings definitely aid in identifying the problem, which is essential, and then work on a solution as we move forward. I wanted to touch on native protected trees. and specifically on dead trees as a result of construction or as a result of the gaps in the city and the building procedures and some of the communications that are currently had here. I'm in a very unique position, I believe, where I am able to see many, again, a lot of tree removal requests. I'm able to kind of scrutinize and question, why certain things occur. And I thought it would be prudent to begin, gathering some information to be able to disseminate and share with stakeholders. And this meeting came just in time here. I was actually looking at a case study at this particular address. As we can see here is a majestic coast live oak here prior to any type of development. This is a street view that's being taken in Sunland. And again, I just want to note how, large and healthy this tree is here. I was able to pull some satellite imagery. Again, look at the canopy of this tree. It's extremely large. It provides a lot of benefits. And this is essentially what the city is attempting to protect and retain, by all means necessary, whether it be redesigning or limiting the encroachment that occurs to these trees. Again, I highlight this is an aerial view prior to any construction that is occurring. And this is the old or previous home. What we see here now is an aerial view on 2021. I will back up to, again, this was 2019. So approximately 2 years later, give or take, we have this new home. It's a new footprint. As you can see, there's excavation taking place for plumbing, for some of the utilities occurring here. There's actually an ADU that is being constructed. And this construction is taking place very close to this tree. As you can see, the aerial view already depicts the tree beginning to decline. It's not as green. And again, it's due to the impact of the construction. As we see here, there's no more green on these trees, and coast live oak are not deciduous. What we have here is now a dead tree, but now a new development, a new home, and a new driveway being installed. It's in the process. As you can see, these forms here, this currently, as it stands, is like 98% hardscape concrete. This is the development that occurred, and this new ADU. And again, we highlight the impact of the construction caused the coast live oak, large majestic oak coast live oak, to succumb to the impacts of construction. This is a picture of what the coast live oak looks like now. As you can see, a lot of hardscape. There is a lot of construction, even debris piled up around this tree. It was not considered, it was not protected in place. There was protective fencing. There was a complete disregard to the health of this protected tree. So we go from 2019 to 2022, beautiful tree, to a dead tree. So we asked the question, what happened here? What failed? What system went wrong? And I want to interject the disclaimer here. Department of Building and Safety is a pivotal in development. All of the building permits are issued through this department. Again, it's separate from Department of Public Works, Street Services, and even Urban Forestry. But Urban Forestry is tasked with upholding this protected tree ordinance. So as we dive into this parcel and figure out what occurred, we see that there was permits requested from Building and Safety. We move along, and for both of these, whether it be for the ADU and for the property, there was building additions and building alter repair, building additions, there was grading. These were final. The certificate of occupancy was issued in 2022. The permit was finalized again in 2022. Very recent activity for permits. Within these specific permits, again, as Stella pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, there are clearances that Department of Building and Safety plan checkers are required to assign each permit. Before they issue a permit, these clearances need to have been vetted through numerous departments, through numerous agencies involved. And what we see here is, again, the permit application clearance information, and this is conveyed to the applicant as a clearance summary worksheet that they must go to each department, obtain the clearances, and then come to building and safety and pull their building permits. So what happened here is there was a missing clearance for this permit that was issued by building and safety. The applicant did everything legally. They constructed the building according to the building permits, with the exception of there was no remove or disturb protected trees issued for urban forestry to review and approve prior to issuing building and safety permits. And the clearances, where do they come from and who assigns them to the permits? I believe Ms. Stella Gray touched on it briefly. It comes from the Plan Check Engineers Building Permit Clearance Handbook. And this is the handbook that's utilized by plan checkers at building and safety to determine what clearances to add and when they apply to permits. This is what the excerpt looks like from one of the pages. So again, as she touched on it briefly, this is some of the clearances that would come to Bureau of Street Services. And these clearances are intended to ensure that there is proper review of trees in relation to construction, and ensure that the appropriate measures are taken to protect the trees when we can, and when we cannot preserve trees, then we impose replacement requirements per the municipal code requirements. So we asked the question now, did the property owner know that this tree was protected? So they built their home, and I'm going to make an assumption here. They were able to build their home per the building and safety, but they did not remove the tree. It was obviously in the way, but they only limited their work to cutting back some of these branches to allow for their construction. And we can only assume if they knew or they did not know. And I will proceed to interjecting my opinion here. They're coming to urban forestry after their building was done, and now they're coming for tree removal permits for a protected tree. And the developer happens to be the same property owner. He is the individual that developed his parcel according to all the building and safety requirements. By all means, he did everything by the book. So what's occurring now is he's coming to urban forestry and seeking tree removal permits, and this places our division in a very awkward position to our ability to enforce this any kind of punitive action that we may take, simply because essentially they constructed this with building permits, and I'll elaborate a little more on that. What was the recourse? So currently this applicant, again, is now coming to us. What tools does urban forestry have to address these types of issues? Currently, at this juncture, we'll charge the application fee of $805. We will charge an inspection fee for sending our inspector out and gathering this information. This ordinance for the fees is set forth in 187-205. And I personally review these cases, and I decide. I make my own judgment. A certain level of discretion is required to see how to proceed. So I will exercise the provision in the Municipal Code 4602 to require that the applicant replace or mitigate what was lost to the best of our ability. So we are requiring this applicant to now replace the trees at a 4-to-1 ratio on their property, and we're going to make them, all the hardscape they have is remove that hardscape, and we want 4 trees back on the lot if this tree removal is going to be issued. And again, we're exercising this authority where they say that, the municipal code states that we may require as a condition to grant removal permits this mitigation here. The applicant's also required to bond the trees, and there's an extra fee that's imposed on them for them to even acquire the bond. And we do this exercising in LA Municipal Code 4603, where it says that we may set forth any other condition or requirement needed or deemed necessary by the board. So again, we do our best to resolve the issue with the tools that we're given here for this street. Again, the municipal code as it stands only allows for these provisions to be exercised, or also to pull permits or withhold permits from applicants during development at per LAMC 4606. But being that this is already constructed, there is nothing to withhold. Everything's done, everything's issued, the certificate of occupancy is done. So this was the brief presentation that I had. So these are some of the issues currently happening, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and then I'll address some of the questions. As a final note, again, I don't want to vilify any of the plan checkers. I don't want to vilify Department of Building and Safety. I believe that these are oversights that are occurring. I believe that with the appropriate communications and implementing appropriate, plan check revisions, that we may be able to move forward with a better path for building and safety to communicate to urban forestry, or either require applicants to disclose that they have trees to building and safety. So with this, I conclude the presentation, and then I'll go ahead and take the questions that were outlined. Ms. Gray.
Yeah, Brian, thank you for this. But you kind of preempted further questions. So we do have questions regarding dead trees. But going back to plan check, what specifically can be done, and shouldn't it be a standard clearance requirement, regardless of whether, it just needs to be verified whether plan checker is willing to open Google Earth and look at the lot, or why don't we just have a mandatory requirement for protected trees, and it will be up to the applicant to prove that there are none.
So this is something, Ms. Gray, that we have again recommended or sought to implement. Being that we are a completely different department, there is nothing that we can impose on building and safety. And as it stands, we are working, and we're definitely they're at the table to listen. But plan checkers, we've recommended that they implement something similar to Department of City Planning, where the applicant is required to disclose either the presence or the absence of any tree. And to urban forestry, it seemed like a very simple solution. Just get a checkbox, and if there's trees anywhere near where this permit will be occurring, add that clearance, and we'll review it. And if we deem there's no protected trees, we clear it, send it back. And if there is protected trees, then we review it and ensure that the due process is had, the protections are imposed when feasible, and these trees get a little bit better of a chance of surviving. Some of the responses we've received from some of the management at Building and Safety has not been too favorable. They haven't denied our requests and recommendations, but they're just very reluctant and hesitant to, I guess, implement what other departments are currently implementing.
Okay, so this is where we can help. If we maybe, again, there are other issues, but maybe we can write a motion with your help. And because what I hear from LADBS is that they follow requirements of UFD. If you tell them you need to do this, they will do it. So that is apparently not that simple. And so I definitely saw some revisions to current policies should be implemented. And if you're willing to work with us, we can do something more substantial than just committee meetings. That would be great. I see raised hands. I don't know in what order we should do it. Travis, do you want to try?
Well, I've met with LADBS, so if you would like to hear what I found out, I'm happy to share.
Sure. Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Joanne D'Antonio. I'm the Community Forest Advisory Committee representative for Council District 2, but I'm covering 4 because she just resigned from CFAC. So I was asked by the chair of CFAC to come to this meeting, and Isabel Duvivier, who is co-chair of CFAC, and I, and one other person who used to work for the planning department, Marianne King, have been meeting with LADBS, and we have, I mean, their first reaction to exactly what you were saying, Estella. I mean, you've said it well, and so has Bryan. That they said we don't have anything to do with trees. That's their first response. And we say, but there are trees on the property, and if it's by right, it doesn't go through the planning department. So what happens? So basically they said it's an honor system, just as you've pointed out, that the owner of the property has to fess up that there are protected trees. And if they don't, there really isn't any penalty. And we have gone to the top person at LADBS, and they have been reluctant to require a site map with the trees indicated. That's what Isabel asked for. She's an architect. She said, why aren't the trees on the site map? And on a smaller level, on my neighborhood council, I've noticed that for demolitions, they write clear lot. I was asked them to stop using that language because they clear the trees. And they said, oh no, the developer knows we don't mean that. So I mean, that I'm just reporting. I do think your idea of a motion is good. My neighborhood council's made a motion too. But I think at this point, we're going to have to go to the mayor, and we're going to have to get the mayor who is, you know, over LADBS. And I mean, you know, urban forestry is just a division of Streets LA, and we can't even get the top people at Streets LA to fight for urban forestry. So one of the urban forestry representative staff people that came to CFAC said that the oak tree is worth $125,000. That should be the fine for ruining the tree. And until you have that kind of a stick, you know, this is a single family home replacing a single family home. This is not even creating housing except for that, maybe that ADU, unless it's an office. So I don't want to take up all your time, but that's what I know. And we've been having ongoing meetings, but they haven't led to anything concrete. We have emails from the top person at LADBS.
Thank you, John. Maybe we can get in touch and work together on that.
That'd be great. That'd be great, Stella. I'm so glad you're doing this. I mean, I really am.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Who's next? Steph?
Yeah, hi. I just had 2 things to add in. I noticed that Bryan's PowerPoint had images from the tax assessor because they do regular aerials, unlike Zemus hasn't updated since 2017, Navigate LA since 2020. And so they, you know, it's hard to get that good information on what's really there on a property without driving around a lot. So the tax assessor has some good information, but the other thing which makes me not give LADBS an excuse is a property like the example that Bryan presented would have had a survey, and licensed surveyors are required to note any protected trees on the site and their size. And if someone, a surveyor willfully and knowingly disregarded those trees, they can be fined and have their license revoked. I'm open to placing these fines or outing these people. There was a project at 2123 Groveland Drive that chose to not, on their survey, put down 4 huge oak trees, similar in size to this one in Sunland. There was no way they could have mitigated these trees on this small property. They just pretended they weren't there. Tim Tyson ended up putting this disturbed trees on that property, and then somebody erased it later. So, you can keep going and go after the obvious things and the things that the plan checkers have to look for, and the surveyors have to note on the license, or the stamp plans, and people aren't doing it. It is being missed, and there is at a certain point there is no excuse. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Steph. Mindy?
So 2 things. First, I just want to echo what Joanne was saying. And that is, I wanted to just kind of quickly tell you about an experience I had as an actual homeowner when we were working on my daughter's house, and we had an inspector in our house, and this was just last Thanksgiving. And I will just tell you that perhaps he shouldn't have told us this, but he did. And he had to return, but he told us that he was going to go easy on a lot of what he had to inspect, because he had been given, this is in West LA, the directive not to worry about most of the things if it didn't concern an actual problem with safety, that he shouldn't worry about inspecting those things. Anything that had to do with trees, anything else, if it wasn't a problem in terms of safety for plumbing, electrical, anything else, that he shouldn't even bother looking at those items on the checklist anymore. So that just tells you that they don't care about trees or any of those things, and they're not going to be bothered with those items. So until you find the person in charge at the top who's going to tell them that that's something they need to look at, they're never going to look at it. So I'm just telling you, they don't care, and they're not going to look at it. So you're going to have to find someone at the top who's going to tell them that it's something they have to look at and be concerned with. It's just the reality, unfortunately. That's one thing. The second thing I wanted to ask Bryan about is, you were, saying that there's only so much, unfortunately, that you can do because you have to follow the particular codes, and you do as much as you can. And I know how frustrating that must be. And I was just wondering, is there anything that we might be able to do in terms of trying to make those codes any stricter, by changing them, adding to them, so that you can go after somebody who has actually done damage and destroyed, the tree? Because you mentioned you didn't know if he did it knowingly, because you don't know if he knew it was a protected tree. I've never seen anything in the code that says that somebody has to know that the tree is protected. I thought if you just destroy or hurt an oak tree or a protected tree, that there's certain sanctions. So maybe you can elaborate on that, because obviously they did destroy the tree. It was a beautiful tree, and a few years later, it was dead. So I'm just wondering about that, and whether or not there's some way of making somebody pay in some way a fine if they destroy a tree, since you seem to think that the code didn't allow you to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to point out that the protected trees section of the municipal code is within the 46.00 to 46.06. And I encourage anybody that's interested in reviewing that to do so. There's definitely, it's very clear. And again, in my position, do I feel certain things are right and wrong? I definitely have my own opinions, but as in, a civil servant, my ability to take certain actions has to be within the municipal codes. And if the extent and the reach of our action is dictated by these municipal codes, then again, I'm going to adhere to those. Again, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I sense, I perceive the sentiment by a lot of constituents that certain actions are just plain out wrong. I believe it's just a matter of revising these municipal codes, whether it be through council, through ordinances, and if the sentiment is there should be more fines, if that's what's being asked of individuals like me to uphold, then that's what needs to be reflected on these ordinances. So until it's actually written down, enforceable, then again, I adhere to what is written down within 46.00 to 46.06. As I stated, this particular project had no ability to withhold or revoke permits. The permits were issued, the certificate of occupancy was done. That's just the way it's written. There is no fines again. And at this time, now that they're seeking tree removal permits, the most I can do now is just try to get some more trees replanted on site, get them bonded, while at the same time I'm exercising the ability to do so through, again, these same municipal codes.
Right, thank you. No, I understood that. That's why I was asking, do you feel that there is a way perhaps to change it or add to it to allow, that would allow you, since obviously you're, from what you're saying, you don't feel comfortable that you would be allowed to given the way it's written. So that was my question to you.
Yes, I think that there's a process to, push forth ordinances. I believe they start, this is like how they're thought up, and they get pushed through, through council. And if council makes these revisions to the ordinance, and that allows divisions and departments like ours here to impose those and
Okay.
reflect the wishes of what the people of the city of LA want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Bob? Can you tell-
Yes, has anyone looked at the city of Pasadena's last time I looked, it was 24 protected trees and the language that goes into their ordinance. It may be able to allow us to do to skip a couple of primary steps in getting to it, but they have a protected tree ordinance for 24 trees and they're very coveted about it. I don't know if anybody else knows about that or has heard about it at all. Brian or Joanne?
Definitely, I personally think there's a lot of other municipalities that have, different verbiage written into their municipal codes protecting trees. I think definitely as we develop recommendations for council to adopt as municipal codes, I think it's good to reference other municipalities and just pick apart, what people would like reflected in these codes.
Well, since you asked me to, I will tell you that the urban forestry management plan that is in the works, we have asked Rachel Mallarich to put in a robust enforcement element because urban forestry is understaffed in that area. So even to enforce what little we have, for example, if you violate the protected tree ordinance, now it doesn't help the example that we were given in the PowerPoint, but let's say there's a developer who wants to build, if they violate the protected tree ordinance, and usually it requires an attorney to get this to happen, but they can be prohibited from getting a building permit for 10 years. And this happened successfully in Brentwood. There's only been one case and they did lawyer up to do it. But, there's a group in South LA, 2 CFAC members who got Marquise Harris Dawson to write a motion that has passed. It's waiting for a report back. It's supposed to be 30 days. It's now been months, almost a year. And that was to require that all trees of a certain DBH be protected. So larger trees, and that would require a site plan of what trees exist on the lot. But when they did it, they didn't put an enforcement element. And I said, well, what would prevent a developer from removing all the trees first and then applying for a building permit? And I actually stopped working with them because of that, because I said, without an enforcement element, it's not going to happen. I mean, we're going to have people just violating. So I do suggest you look at this motion. It's 15-0745. And I do think we need more. And one more thing I'll say before I be quiet is that the new city attorney is tree interested. The past city attorney was only liability conscious. And even the Board of Public Works city attorney is only liability conscious. And it really has no interest in the environmental, ecosystem services of trees. And I think the new city attorney, I mean, I've met with her and I think she is more tree interested. So I think that what few codes we do have could be better enforced by going to the city attorney and requiring that, and then go to your council people and try to get more motions through. And hopefully with the mayor's blessing, we can get LADBS to take more of an interest in trees, and maybe even with the city attorney's pressure. So those are the suggestions I can make. And as I said, I'm thrilled that neighbor councils are getting interested in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, Brian. Thanks for coming today. I have actually 3 questions. The first is, and I'll just kind of ask the question and then you can answer and then I'll move to the next one as opposed to getting them all at once. I've been involved, I guess, or CC'd in 3 situations where residents discovered that there was a pending building permit application or grading permit application, but there was no clearance. What they did was email you and show you pictures and proof, and you interface with the LADBS to get the clearance issued. But a lot of people are not going to know how to do that. We have a gigantic city. So what is the best practice for people in that circumstance when they need to ensure that an appropriate clearance is added so that the protected trees are not ignored in the plan check process?
Hey, Jamie, yeah, that's a good question. Again, I want to point out, I don't vilify Department of Building and Safety's plan checkers. Again, if there's any permits that are issued, I sincerely believe that there's a gap in the process. It's not conveyed to them what they're supposed to be looking for. And again, the responses I received from Building and Safety when constituents are concerned about a building permit, I personally forwarded emails over to some of the executives or the plan checker directly. And I've received a very positive response of, oh, we didn't know these trees were there. We're going to add it and make them go through the review process. I want to point out that the tree protection is a joint effort. I believe that the residents, the constituents have a big role to play in the way that the city enforces protects these trees. So again, if the community is involved, if they're engaged with reaching out and just trying to find a contact person, once that contact is made, then these things can get resolved without going through the process, and trees get removed unnecessarily.
Yeah, but for the sake of this question, this is a situation where someone becomes aware that there's a pending building permit application. They're smart enough to go onto the LADBS website and determine that there is no clearance. Is the best practice to reach out to UFD to make sure that to get you to interface with LADBS and get the clearance added? Is that the best practice?
Yeah, I would suggest, attempt to make contact with a DBS plan checker. The plan checker's name is on that permit that is of concern.
So what happened with Stella, as you may recall, is the plan checkers put the wrong clearance. He put clearance for street trees. And
Correct.
Stella, because she's super smart, she went to the clearance handbook and she found the correct clearance. And she got you to tell that person to add the right clearance
Correct.
for protected trees.
So I was going to finish by saying if there's no good response, I don't know how DBS plan check takes to just a random constituent requesting a certain item be placed. If there's no traction with those conversations, definitely reach out to me, and it's just an email away. Again, my
Yeah.
job and function here is to do what I can to protect these trees, and an email is no big task.
Thank you. And my suggestion, and I don't think it requires any code amendments for this, is to, on your website, have a form that says request for clearance to be added for protected trees or something like that. I mean, I fear that there's a handful of people in the know that know how to do these things, and that the overwhelming majority of people will be clueless. So I think that there's things that can happen absent amendment of ordinances to make people, when people are under the circumstance and they go to your website, I don't think it's clear how to fix the situation. So that's just a suggestion, and maybe we can put that in our motion to and or letter. And the second issue is, code enforcement. We heard Joanne talk a little bit about the fact that we already have provisions in the code that provide for really like strong enforcement. I've talked to people about this. I don't think we need any amendment of the ordinance. The problem is that it's just such a pain in the butt that the city never goes through the process. You have to there's a hearing officer that has to be hired. There's due process. There has to be public notice and testimony, because you're taking away a person's property rights. So the city just doesn't do it. And like you said, the best I can do in the circumstances just require replacement trees. That's one of the options. That is not your only option. The other option is this longer process where you have to go through, code enforcement, and it has happened before. So I have never successfully been able to get UFD to initiate that process. And have you, in your time period at UFD, ever seen UFD go through that process where they were instituting potential withholding of building permits for violating the ordinance?
Hey, Jamie, yes, that's something that I inquired about. I was able to find on file from some city attorneys a couple of times where it was initiated. As the ordinance is written, our ability to act is on 4606, and this it's cumbersome. I completely agree, and maybe that's the reason why it's just not readily sought after. There's a time frame that needs to be met. There needs to be hearings. There's a lot of legalities involved. But the portion of it that I want to highlight on 4606 is that it's not urban forestry. It's the director of the Bureau of Street Services that also needs to be involved. They need to request from building and safety to withhold these permits. So the key player again is building and safety. They're the holders of of the final enforcement here. Once this request is made, it's left up to the executives at building and safety to either withhold or not. And Jamie, as you're speaking, I want to highlight a point in the ordinance that should be of concern to anybody that's seeking to preserve trees. On 4602A3, it clearly specifies that if a building permit has been issued for a property and it's still in effect with respect to the property under consideration, and this building permit, its implementation would necessitate tree removal or relocation, then this exemption is applicable, meaning you don't need a permit because building and safety said that this building or this retaining wall would necessitate the removal of the tree. Again,
Well,
as we are being tasked with enforcing this, interpreting this, through working with our city attorneys, again, these are code. It's very clear, and it should be interpreted as it's written. And I think these are a good starting point to, there's definitely some revisions that need to be made. So for projects that have already received their building permits, it's exempting them from having to come to us for removal permits.
yeah, that's a completely different circumstance, and I don't want to get distracted. I
Okay.
don't read it as broadly as you do. I think that was something that was a holdover from when the ordinance was originally adopted, that exempted, certain projects. But
Agreed.
Anyway, my point is that it's I hear you completely about the fact that this is a cumbersome process and that it's not just UFD, it's the director of street services that has to get involved. And one of the suggestions that maybe our neighborhood council could, think about is whether or not we need to add this as part of the ACE program, the Administrative Code Enforcement, which was a pilot program adopted a few years ago for certain types of code enforcement violations. And this is, by the way, not the only situation where the city has not been a very good, they have lacked to enforcing its statutes. So they adopted this ACE program, which is supposed to make it easier and less cumbersome. And so it seems like maybe this is a perfect situation where we should think about having, ACE be involved. And then my final question for you, and I really just don't know the answer to this. I know the city takes bonds, requires bonds, and I know that the amount of the bond deviates based on the number of trees and the size of the trees and things like that. I also know that the city requires maintenance of the trees for a required period of time. My question is, how often is it, and maybe you don't know the answer, but I do want to figure this out, that the applicant or the permittee fails to come back to the city and the bond is forfeited? Because the whole purpose of the bond is to give the city the resources to do the tree planting themselves in the event that the applicant fails to adhere to the terms of the tree removal permit. But this last part of the whole process, the issuance of the bond, whether or not the city actually ever uses the bond money to go replant the trees, it doesn't have much transparency because the public's not involved. So I don't know how that process works. And I was wondering if you could spend a few minutes just to explain that to us.
I can't speak to specific details of it because I don't have it before me. If you'd like more information on it, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. But for my understanding as an overview, again, as these bonds are defaulted or not recollected by the applicants, they go into a fund, and these it's a protected tree fund that's dedicated to replant throughout the city the native protected trees. To my knowledge, again, this is a little more on under the purview of our superintendents that oversee planting, but it's something that is being essentially pulled from these funds, and planting is taking place. And if I recall, it was supposed to take place somewhere in the valley. And again, I can
know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I apologize for interrupting, and I'm just going to offer my personal opinion here, which is that the purpose of the bond was to ensure that replanting occurred at the project site in the event that the applicant failed to adhere to the terms of the tree removal permit. However, like many things in our city, it has not evolved that way. And like you said, it gets put into a general fund. This is my understanding. And just recently, the city authorized the usage of $666,000 of that money, the forfeited bonds, to go plant trees like 20 miles away from where the project occurred in the public right of way. And are a lot of people that are really unhappy about that. And I'm just wondering, you know, how often this really occurs. You know, if it's a rare circumstance, and most bonds, I've also been told that like after the 3-year, you know, maintenance period, UFD is called out for an inspection. And then if the trees are still there, that's when they'll give you the bond back. I want to know, this is a longer conversation, but I would like to figure out who in the UFD knows the most information about this, invite them back to our neighborhood council so that we can better understand the process, because we want to make sure that those trees are replanted on site and they're being maintained for a 3-year period.
Great. Yeah, Jamie, I'd be more than happy to continue conversations. Again, I have to hop off right now. Is like
Okay,
end of
I
my
apologize.
shift.
I'm going to be sorry, I took over too much time. Thank you for your time.
Okay. I want to, Brian, if you have a couple of minutes, there was a question regarding fallen trees that fell because of natural, for natural reasons, because of wind or some other disaster. Who verifies that this tree doesn't have a chance, and what do we do with these trees?
So Stella, I saw, and I actually took some time to answer these questions. If you'd like, I can email you. You know, again, some of these are questions that are not, or I'm sorry, answers that are not objective. Some of these are kind of like, what is your opinion on this and that? I'd be more than happy to forward that email over to you. But as it pertains to, you know, fallen trees, if an applicant comes to urban forestry for a tree removal permit, you know, the applicable fees apply. We do our best to really look at why the tree fell over, and you know, that's what these protected tree reports are for, to give us a little more insight on it, and that kind of allows us to determine whether or not to exercise, you know, did this happen naturally, and if it didn't, if something contributed to it, then you know, we may choose to exercise the making them, you know, replant on site. So it's case by case, and it depends, you know, where the tree is.
Okay. Would you actually go to the site?
Yes. So whenever there is, you know, a tree application, then an inspector will go out and verify what's being reported.
Okay, thank you. And I think the last question, it was actually Jamie suggested it regarding SB9, since you know, the process, the city is accepting applications, and who is going to review all the documents that they have to provide, the applicant has to provide to be allowed to build?
So SB9 would be more within the purview of city planning. They're the ones that draw the lines on these parcels. They have reached out to urban forestry whenever there's, you know, protected trees on site, and from the beginning, we're able to review them and confirm if a protected tree report is accurate, and we just convey that information back to them, and they're the ones that make the determination as to how to proceed. But again, SB9 is something that's outside of the purview of our division. We're not land use. That is more city planning.
But you will be reviewing actual lots.
Whenever they're referred to us, yes. So whenever there's a tree disclosure, which city planning currently has, and there's an SB9 lot split, then we're able to verify content of the report.
Okay, awesome. And you know, one of the hearings is coming. Well, there's no hearing, but the same property trusser, 8875 trusser, applied for lot subdivision using SB9, and they did obtain the report of habitat and protected sensitive species that states that there are none on the lot. You already are familiar with the lot, you know, it's black walnut grows right on the lot, and so they found some, you know, biologist who testifies in the report that there are no protected species on the lot. So what do we do with this? Are there any repercussions? What do you do with this biologist, and how do you treat this case?
Stella, I'd love to answer to the best of my ability, but again, I think the SB9 lot splits, when they're referred to urban forestry, our review is for the protected tree, verifying that certain trees are on site. It's been conveyed also by city planning that a lot split that doesn't necessarily mean that development is taking place right then and there. I think the intent is to ultimately do that, but at the time that the lot split is happening, I can't speak to what CEQA review or CEQA determination is made just for the action of the lot split. That just goes a little bit above my current knowledge here.
Okay, but we will continue. I know that we're running out of time, and we really appreciate it. It was wonderful conversation. So I guess, yeah, if you don't mind emailing the responses that you already prepared, it would be fabulous. And I hope that we can continue the conversation.
Great, Stella. Again, I want to just interject that some of these questions were kind of directed at some of my opinions. I'm more than happy to share those opinions, but they should be taken with a grain of salt as you review them. So
I know we can't trust you, but but I think that it would be very valuable, again, in light of working on emotion and making some suggestions. I think your opinion will be very valuable.
okay, Stella, thank you. And again, I joined here with the intent to share whatever knowledge I can here. I'm one to value transparency, so definitely if anybody needs anything from me, I make myself available as long as my schedule can accommodate. But I also wanted to be able to understand who's who in the city, and if there's any partnerships that can be had, I'm more than happy to continue that process.
Wonderful. Thank you again on behalf of everyone. Thank you very much, Bryan, for your time and your knowledge. We really appreciate it. Thank you. You can't hear clapping, but people are clapping.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have two quick things that I can add. Tomorrow morning, the Planning Commission is going to present their protected tree removal PowerPoint. So that's at 8:30. It's the same meeting that the wildlife is going to be on. And also regarding ACE, Bureau of Street Services has they give out ACE tickets, and they will give out one at the behest of urban forestry. But one of the problems is that the people that go out for Bureau of Street Services and can write these tickets do not have the knowledge to understand anything about trees. Urban forestry has that expertise, but the people actually writing the tickets don't. So they can only go out and give a ticket after urban forestry directs them to do it. Urban forestry doesn't write the tickets themselves. So maybe that's something you want to request, that they actually have that ability, give them a badge and allow them to do that.
Thank you. I assume that I don't need to memorize everything you say now, that we'll have a opportunity to talk about it again. John.
Yeah, you're welcome to contact me. I mean, I registered with my CFAC email address, and the number of the people on this call know how to reach me. So, please feel free. I mean, I've tried to collect this knowledge as a volunteer for the last 8 years. So, whatever I know, I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we were a little bit behind by 8 years.
Joanne, who stepped down?
Catherine Pacradoni. This is a big loss because she's very knowledgeable about native trees, but she's very busy with the Liberty Canyon crossing project, and as you can't do both.
You know, I have one idea, Stella. Maybe in the interim, we could put on the VADCNC website a little, you know, some basic stuff about protected trees, and also about the procedure for what happens if, how do you report to LADBS that there are protected trees on a site when there's a pending building permit application? Because what you did in terms of getting that clearance added was huge. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone achieve that, and you figured out precisely what clearance needed to be added. So I really feel like that, you know, we've got to make it easier for people to know what to do when they find themselves in this circumstance. The knowledge just can't be with a handful of people.
Yeah, you know, you're right. And actually, Linda Woodward helped to write, helped me with the sequence of reporting. So we did report, and I wanted to interject when Bryan was talking about reporting. This is the easiest thing to report on 311, but it's a little bit cumbersome to find the right place to click. And so I already have a narrative how to do it. So we need to distribute it. We need to educate people. Absolutely. And that's first step, because no matter what it is, you can always report it, and the report goes to UFD, and then they know that, okay, the clearance is missing. You know, there's no, you can basically report anything related to the tree. If there's no, to protected trees, if there's no other method of reporting, so that will go to Bryan. And then, you know, and once you have a service number, then you can actually send the service number to Bryan with other comments and photographs and, you know, whatever helps him understand the situation. And so we've done it. And he was very helpful.
Great.
Yeah, we've done it on different property again in our neighborhood, and we stop people from cutting walnuts. So we just need to place it somewhere on. We will do it on the DSPNA website, but we can do it. I don't know if there is a proper place on the neighborhood council website to. Maybe we should start some informational page where we can place it. We have mounds of information how to report all kinds of LADBS violations, millions of things, and party houses. You know, it's literally a little book, and trees should be included. And people, when they have a problem, they go to the website. Instructions are there. It becomes very easy. So maybe it's something we can, you know, the board can discuss, and you know, we can contribute information to it. So this is it. I think we need to close the meeting, and thank you very much for everyone to come. And it's funny that the committee actually didn't have a quorum, so we didn't do any formal part, but it was a great discussion. So again, you have a wonderful evening, and Travis, thank you for staying on. Really appreciate it. Yeah, if you can send me a recording as usual, that would be cool. Yeah, that will help me.
Will do. Yep.
Yes, Bob.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.